Good morning. We are now up to Parak Aleph Mishna Beis in Maseches Trumas. Okay, so yesterday the previous Mishnah spoke about the 5 people who, if they separate Truma, what they did isn't valid. Now we have the next case, and one of the cases before was a cherish, which we said cherish there meant a deaf mute, which is going to be more clarified in this Mishnah. Cherish hamadaber ve'eino shomea lo yitrei. A cherish that can speak. He's deaf, but he can speak. Lo yitrei. He should not separate truma. The imtara, but if he did, truma say truma, it is a good separation. That is a valid separation of truma, which means initially he shouldn't do it, but if he does it, it works. Why shouldn't he do it? So we're talking about here a person who is deaf but speaks, which means, at a point of no, so to speak, a controversy discussion, is if, let's say, the person learned how to speak and then became deaf. That a person unquestionably does not fall into the category of a deaf mute that we spoke about before. And therefore, his actions are good actions. Actions are valid. But we still say he should not initially separate truma. The reason is because when one separates truma, you make a bracha. And when you make a bracha, you're supposed to hear the bracha that you said. Since he can't hear the bracha that he said, it's best he doesn't separate truma. Now, of course, if that's the reason, now we understand very well why, if he does it, it still works. If you separate truma without a bracha, it's still going to work. And therefore, we want him to make the bracha. We want the bracha to be made in the most appropriate way, which is that the person making the bracha should hear it. But if you didn't make the bracha at all, it still would have been good. So therefore, the cherish here, who separated, and he made a bracha, isn't any worse than not making a bracha. Actually, the whole halacha that one should hear a bracha is also a chatchila. Initially, one should hear their bracha. If you didn't hear their bracha, the bracha still works. So the reason why we're saying here in the beginning of the Mishnah that this person who is deaf, he can speak, but he's deaf. The reason why he shouldn't separate truma is because when you separate truma, you're supposed to make a bracha, you're supposed to make a blessing, and you're supposed to hear the blessing when you make it. But if he meant ahead anyway and separated the truma, it's going to work because he is totally capable of doing anything when it comes to being able to affect different things. And therefore, we say if he did separate the truma, his truma is a truma. Then the Mishnah now lays down a rule, and that is any place where the Chachamim spoke about a cheresh, that's the word that's used, which means a deaf person. What that means is he doesn't hear and he doesn't speak, which means that he was born deaf, and therefore he never learned to develop his speech. That is the cherish, that whenever the sages spoke about a cherish, that a cherish, a deaf person, cannot affect things, that is talking about where he is a deaf mute, he was born deaf, and therefore never learned how to speak. And that's the Mishnah before. The cherish that cannot separate truma at all is the cherish that was a deaf mute, he was born deaf, and therefore he never learned how to speak, he never developed that, and therefore he is considered underdeveloped, and again excluded based on verses in the Torah. Now the Baal Tanura speaks out that although the wording of the Mishnah is that cherish wherever the Chachamim spoke about a cherish, it means that he doesn't hear nor speak. Baal Tanura says that's not necessarily true. Although it says b'chol makom, it doesn't mean everywhere literally, because there are places where even a person who is deaf and can speak is also excluded from certain laws. But the point is that most of the times, whenever the sages speak about a cherish, and they use the word cherish, deaf, which means deaf, without any classification, usually that refers to a person who is a deaf mute, who was born deaf, and therefore never learned how to speak. Okay, that's the end of the Mishnah. Now the Sefer HaMitzvot. Mitzvahs lo yisaseh shel halvos li Yisrael beribis bein b'kesef bein devar meichel sha'ar devarim. Prohibition against lending on interest, with interest, whether it be money, whether it be something to eat, whether it be anything else. Whatever it is that you're dealing with, you may not lend on interest. Again, whether you're lending money, you're lending food, when you're giving him food, but he's supposed to reimburse you, or whatever other thing it may be, but it's all with interest, then we say that that's what this prohibition we're about to read includes. Shinamaz, it states, as your money you shall not give him at interest, and with usury you shall not give him your food. So we see clearly the Torah is talking about giving money, giving food, and it says not to take interest or usury, which is the same thing. Neshach v'sarbis echadu. Both those words, neshach v'sarbis, which we translated neshach as interest and tarbis as usury, are the same thing. The Chokam HaKasav, nonetheless, the Torah designated them, mentioned them separately, la'avra b'shnei lavin, to actually create two separate prohibitions. Two separate prohibitions when it comes to lending. If you lend if you lend with interest, you will have transgressed two prohibitions. Now this is we're talking about lending, and the lender, besides for transgressing the prohibitions that we just said, will also transgress the prohibition that we learned yesterday, which is do not place interest upon him, which means don't have any involvement with interest. You're also going to transgress another verse in the Torah in a different place where it says, don't take from him interest and usury. The Torah clearly is very strict about taking interest because it creates many different prohibitions for a person who does so. With one act of taking interest, you can transgress many prohibitions. This applies in all places at all times, both by men and by women. Next, prohibition not to borrow money on interest from a Jew. You shall not give interest to your brother. This is a warning, a prohibition to the borrower. The borrower is also going to be transgressing the prohibition of causing someone to stumble, because by giving the borrower interest, you're now enabling the borrower to transgress the prohibition of taking interest. So when you pay interest, there's a specific prohibition about paying interest, and also you're causing the lender to take interest, which therefore means you are transgressing the prohibition of causing someone to stumble. This applies in all places, at all times, both by men and by women. Let's do one more mitzvah. Okay, we'll see maybe two. Prohibition against lending to a Jew out of fear that Shemitah is going to cancel the debt. As it states, guard yourself. Lest there be an evil matter in your heart, saying, the seventh year, which the year that cancels debts, is approaching. And now you'll become stingy against your brother in need, and you will not want to lend him. Not doing this, not lending out of fear of Shemitah, knocking off the debt, is a very grave sin. For doing so, this is called blial, which means a very wicked thing to do. This applies both by men and by women. The daraisa, from a Torah point, when the Jubilee year, when the 50th Jubilee year, which is after 7 cycles of Shemitah, there's the 50th year. When the 50th year is active, that is when the Torah, that's when if you don't lend money because you're afraid of Shemitah, is going to be a Torah prohibition, because it's only when Yovel is applying that the whole idea of a debt being canceled by Shemitah applies from the Torah. Nowadays, there's no Yovel, Rabbanan. It all applies under rabbinic law. The Kasser Rabbeinu Yonah, the sage Rabbeinu Yonah writes, if the Torah is telling us that when it's coming close to the possibility of losing your debt, even then the Torah says don't hold back from lending somebody money, all the more so at a point of time that you shouldn't really be concerned that your debt is going to be lost. that if you don't lend money, then somebody who isn't willing to lend money, how much greater sin is going to be. If it's considered a wicked thing, even when the possibility of you losing the money, it's still considered wicked not to lend him the money, all the more so when the chance of lending the money are much less, that not lending him the money when you could is a greater sin. Let's do one more small mitzvah that relates to this. A prohibition against demanding payment for a debt that was already canceled by Shemitah. As it says, he shall not demand from his friend, from his brother, for there already has been a Shemitah to Hashem. There's already been the Shemitah year, the cancellation year to Hashem. So therefore, the Torah is specifically prohibiting, do not demand the payment of the debt after Shemitah cancels it. All this applies when Yovel is applicable. But nowadays, the whole concept of Shemitah, taking away a debt, is only rabbinic in nature. You will not be transgressing this prohibition, but you will be transgressing a rabbinic prohibition if you demand the payment for the debt. Have a wonderful day, a wonderful Shabbos.